The thing I really like about Hope for Us is that it really points the way forward, not only in what we need to dismantle, but the culture that we want to build, where conflict is understood as an inherent part of community. It's not wrong, but we have to be ready for how we engage our covenant and our commitments. And that takes, yeah, skill and energy and effort. And it's really important.
Hi, this is Aisha Hauser. I'm a minister at the Church of the Larger Fellowship, and this is our podcast. I wanted to thank you for joining us today. I hope this inspires you, hope it builds your faith, hope it gives you perspective to experience the power of Unitarian Universalism at work in your life. Enjoy the message.
Hello, dear ones. Welcome to another episode of The View, the Voices of Unitarian Universalism, the Church of the Larger Fellowship's weekly talk show. I am the Reverend Dr. Michael Tino. I am 1/3 of the Church of the Larger Fellowship's lead ministry team, and I am here in Peekskill, New York. Joining me today hosting is Dawn Fortune and Kiana Dene Perkins. We are so happy to have Kiana Dene back as a guest co-host. Dawn, how are you today?
I am doing all right. I am Dawn Fortune. I am a minister serving a congregation here in South Jersey. I'm excited for the show today. And I'm going to toss it over to Kiana Dene.
For those of you who don't know me or just meeting me again, I am Kiana Dene Perkins. I'm located out of Ann Arbor, Michigan. I serve as the coordinator of congregational life at First Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Ann Arbor. And I'm excited to be here. For me, this is one of those vortex conversation moments as I am starting to do my own faith formation. So I'm excited to be here.
What I want to do is start by holding a little bit of space for grief, for noting the grief that is especially still present in the BIPOC Unitarian Universalist community, and grief that is present in anyone who has been influenced or transformed, as many of us have, by the liberatory work of bell hooks who joined the ancestors yesterday or the day before. So I want to hold a little bit of space.
One of the things that I've been lucky to practice much more in the last 6 months is somatic practice and paying attention to where things are sitting in my body. And so I just invite folks to think about where grief is sitting in your body, where it's traveling to, where it's ending up, and just to be present to that and to honor it. Matthew is a very good friend. I was just able to look at pictures for the first time yesterday, but I was also able to really be present to the energy of grief and nurture it. I think it's something in our culture we're taught that it's far away or super close, right? Those are the options. And sometimes it's an arm's length away and sometimes it's way over there. But I let it be in my body and I moved it around a bunch. And that felt really good. So I just offer that as we try to absorb all of this beauty that these lives shared with us, that we also take the time to be present to where it is in our body and how we can move it around and carry it and let it go when we need to as well.
And it's important to note that grief changes, right? It morphs and adapts, and sometimes it's an arm's length away and then it comes real close and then it goes far away and then it comes real close again. Sometimes the way we experience it also is because of other things that are happening in the world, the enormity of the grief that especially our Black siblings are holding right now over the number of Black Unitarian Universalist leaders who have joined the ancestors in the last year. That enormity needs to be recognized too. So we hold that space and we're grateful that you're here. So I want to introduce our guests because I think that they have something to say about this topic as well as others. Today we are so excited to be joined by Susan Frederick Ray, the president of the Unitarian Universalist Association, and Carrie McDonald, the executive vice president of the UUA. It doesn't get a higher level in terms of Unitarian Universalist thinkers and influencers. So Susan and Carrie, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, Carrie and I were talking together about this time and opportunity to be in conversation with all of you. It really is a gift. And top of my heart is just the acknowledgement of how much grief and trauma we have been through in the past weeks, in the past years, and the number of Black UU leaders that have joined the ancestors. We often have to compartmentalize it to get whatever needs to get done. But if we don't return to that heart space, to that attention to grief, it comes to us anyway in all kinds of ways. So I just want folks to know that I hold you in my heart. I pray that you may have time in unhurried moments to tend to your grief and your body and your spirit, that you may feel the love of your larger faith community, as well as the love that always holds us and never lets us go, and feel that presence. These past several years, not just the pandemic, but definitely the pandemic, as well as just the political realities, the level of violence in our communities from police against Black and Brown people. Now, as the pandemic shifts, now we have mass shootings on the rise and in our schools, just the incredible toll that this has taken. I just want to recognize that, and that the toll, all of us have experienced it, and it hasn't been equitable. It has specifically hit communities of color, disabled communities, trans communities. I want to turn it over to Carrie in a moment, but one of the things that's been an important part of our job, we have had to think a lot about how to care for our staff going through this. And we've had to make shifts and changes in practices and policies to help people feel cared for and survive in this time. And so also, I want to offer my care to all of our leaders and religious professionals. I know so many of you are exhausted, and I share that. I also want to say to our board leaders, to senior ministers, remember the importance of caring for your staff, and that the work we do is fundamentally human work, community work, caring work. And it's important to model that in not just in the ministries we offer, but how we lead and how we care for each other and care for our staff. So I know people have needed breaks. Being able to support folks where they are and what they need to survive is really important. I just want to share that as a reminder to our congregations about having expectations that are rooted in the realities of what we're all going through, and that center care and center the need to take care of one another and our well-being. Carrie, please.
Well, thank you, Susan. And just +1 to each and everything that I think you just said. I think part of what's happening at this stage in this pandemic, going on 2 years, right, is the thing that's happening in the moment is not the thing happening in the moment. It's also all the things that have happened in the last 2 years or the last few hundred years. But the layers of grief is part of what I know I'm feeling as someone who's lost family members in the pandemic, lost dearly beloved colleagues. I know I'm not alone in that. And it's absolutely been the personal and professional supports of this faith community that have helped me make it through that. And so I think that the accumulated grief is something that we are now reckoning with, and that is showing up for leaders 100%. We see that in terms of the ways conflict emerged, the way just there's less reserve, there's less grace. Everybody needs more and everyone has less to give. You can't resolve it. It's just so much.
I wanted to say that I think it's so important that you all are engaging in self-care. And one of the things I heard you say is life doesn't stop, which brings me to where you all were on Monday, right? The need for us to individually care for ourselves is big, but we also still have a communal obligation. So Susan, can you talk a little bit about the work that you all were doing with the People's Campaign?
The Poor People's Campaign, absolutely. So on Monday, there was a huge action in Washington, D.C., led by the Poor People's Campaign, but really a coalition as well. A lot of organizations signed on, including the UUA and our Side with Love organizing team. And there were, I think, 400 or 500 people gathered outside the Capitol pushing for getting the Build Back Better Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and the Freedom to Vote Act passed in 2021. The threats to democracy are, I think, actually voter suppression and voter subversion, election subversion that's been passing through the states is one of the gravest threats facing our country right now. We need federal action to protect voting rights across the country. expand voting rights, expand voting accessibility, as well as preserve the integrity of our elections. And then the Build Back Better Act is so critical as we really try to shift a progressive turn in our country to put people first. The reality of 140 million Americans living in poverty, almost half of Americans living in or at the very edge of poverty in the richest nation in the world, is shameful. And it doesn't have to be this way. Poverty is a policy choice. Drawing together and actually trying not to separate democracy from the economic injustice in our country, because poverty also disenfranchises people, right? And the lack of worker protections and worker rights, that makes it hard for people to vote because they can't get a Tuesday in November off to vote. There's all sorts of inhibitors to access to voting. So to work on these two issues, to demand action, and that's why these coalitions came together on Monday. Unitarian Universalists at the action showing up, and about 71 people took arrest, moving in to block a street near the Capitol to draw attention. As Bishop Barber said, we're not here to get arrested. We are here to arrest the attention of the Senate and arrest the attention of the country about the urgency of a moral movement for democracy and for economic justice. And so it was powerful, and I was proud to be a part of the action. There was a lot of mobilization, good media coverage. National commentators and faith communities are starting to ramp up even further the demands for action for the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. And I'll turn it over to Carrie, because there was all this organizing happening through the Side with Love action campaign. So it wasn't just about who was in DC.
Yeah, thanks, Susan. I think this was a beautiful example of how UUs are ready to mobilize and to show up and show out and reach out right in the moment when it can have impact. And that is actually representing years of work, building that kind of capacity and skill and relationships to call on right when it's needed. I think that the UU the Vote initiative that we had in 2020, which reached over 3 million voters with democracy protection and mobilized thousands of volunteers across Unitarian Universalism to do that incredible faith-based and partnership-based work at many levels. This can't be a one-time deal. And so in the last year, what we've been doing is transitioning the success of UU the Vote and the engagement to be an ongoing infrastructure for organizing across Unitarian Universalism. And we brought all of that under the banner of Side with Love, the yellow shirts that are such an important part of our faith-based identity and help us be seen in those photos. The prophetic framing of harnessing love's power to stop oppression is really where all of our justice work is rooted and all of our intersectional priorities. So I want to give huge shout outs to Ashley Horan and Nicole Presley with our organizing strategy team who have led this transition. We now have an action center online. So you can go to sidewithlove.org/action center and you can find the volunteer squads to get a part of. You can get information and updates. You can get the training opportunities like the latest edition of our organizing school, which brings teams from congregations together to get the skills, the theological grounding, the connections. So we've gotten thousands of folks activated through this Action Center. That's what we are using as the platform for our organizing going forward. And I think it's really made us a model across denominational groups to bring the national capacity with the local partnerships. So you can be involved in a national event like the one that we just had in DC, where we were doing phone banking at the same time, like local-based phone banking, at the same time that folks were out on the street in DC. And you can also use the platform to self-organize in your own community and connect with folks working on something that's really important in your community about jail construction or something else like that. So it's a beautiful demonstration moment of how some of that work has made a new set of things possible for us showing up for our faith and our values.
I keep hearing us refer to the United States as the richest country in the world. But I think a country where 140 million people are living in or near the poverty line is not the richest country in the world. John Steinbeck said, socialism never took root in America because the poor see themselves not as exploited proletariat, but as temporarily embarrassed millionaires. So I would like us to examine what it means to call ourselves the richest nation in the world. The richest country in the world takes care of its people. The richest country in the world provides medical care for people. The richest country in the world ought not be letting people die for lack of affordable health care. The richest country in the world should not have toddlers' parents setting up GoFundMe accounts so the kid can get the sort of adaptive equipment that they need to have a shot at a functional life. I think, like Steinbeck said, we believe ourselves to be temporarily embarrassed millionaires. None of us want to really acknowledge that the vast majority of Americans are exploited proletariat. And as long as they keep being led to believe that they are temporarily embarrassed millionaires, they will never fight back.
Thank you, Dawn. I think that was really important framing. I think Carrie wants to take it in another direction, but it reminds me that so many of the ways that we talk about the United States through a lens of exceptionalism. We also see this in Unitarian Universalism, right? That we talk and think of ourselves in an exceptionalist frame, and how that silences and denies the reality of what's happening in people's lives in the United States. Sometimes I try to use simple language for media, but even to talk about defending democracy. We have been backsliding on democracy for a long time. And the Voting Rights Act, which guaranteed the right to vote to all citizens, regardless of skin color, is only 50 years old when it's already been dismantled. Just our notions of democracy, of freedom in the country with the most incarcerated people, all of these ways in which we describe the United States out of a language of exceptionalism serves to silence and actually discredit and deny the majority of people's reality. So I really appreciate that. It makes me think about a lot of the ways that even I use language to make things kind of simple or clear, and it's always more complicated than that. And I'm from the Midwest, and coming out of those devastating tornadoes and what we're hearing about in the candle factory, that workers were threatened with being fired if they left before the tornado came, with the Amazon workers not being allowed to leave. The exploitation of workers is a central issue, and it's exciting to see a moment around labor, but what happened in the midst of those tornadoes is absolutely devastating. Shows the level of exploitation that our corporations and companies have for workers. And Carrie,
the irony about talking about Unitarian Universalists as exceptional is how central we've been to the development of white middle class culture in America. I mean, we basically brought over the Christmas tree. That's not exceptional. That's like creating what is normative. There's a podcast I heard, and I'm sorry, I'm not remembering which UUs have put this together, talking about Fannie Farmer, who basically created like white middle class cooking and was Unitarian. So we are deeply a part of that American melting pot narrative, and our particularly Northeast wealthy, educated, Harvard educated forebears and ancestors were at the founding of the white settler colonialist mentality of the country. And the idea about being able to be a millionaire if only luck breaks your way, the bootstraps narrative, all of that is marketing that was core to getting poor folks from Europe to come and settle the land here. And you don't have that marketing without the militarized clearing of land systematically and extermination of indigenous peoples. Unitarian Universalists don't just trace our heritage to the Mayflower. We trace our heritage through the Mayflower to the congregation that existed in England that then created the Mayflower. So I think that we sometimes underestimate, because of some of the sociopolitical locations of our faith community currently, in like the current left-right divide or what have you, how deep this stuff goes and how much it has shaped all of the aspects of our faith, the way we think about leadership, the way we think about what it means to be in community. So that's just what I wanted to offer. And I say that as somebody who has ancestors among Unitarians in New England. So I'm also a person of color, right? And so I'm both complicit in that as well as suffering from that. And it is so close to the surface in all these conversations that we're having, that history feels so alive. Please go read Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States if you haven't done that.
Carrie, it's so interesting. I'm getting all fired up over here. I'm a seminarian. I proudly attend Star King School for the Ministry. I'm in my first year, and when this is over, going to go finish my history final.
You
And
got
having
time.
this deep dig into history that starts not on this continent, that starts in Transylvania or in Eastern Europe in 1520. So our history and who we are is there. But I also think, and this is actually one of the questions I wanted to ask or kind of lean into, is this concept of ingenuity. I got a better understanding of European ingenuity and understood a little bit better what it meant to be persecuted, to have this kind of experience where your lack of belief in the Trinity could get you expelled from your country because church and state were together. I wonder if there is an opportunity for white UUs to have a reconnection to that deeper European history, and if that could help inform how we better connect to this physical piece of land, how we better connect to indigenous people of Turtle Island, and how we better connect with the stolen people of African diaspora and their experience in America through enslavement and colonization. I'm wondering if there is a moment of land and practice connection that we need to experience that's beyond slavery, that's beyond colonization. I wonder what the benefit of that moment of reconnection would be for our faith in its entirety.
I think it's hard to go beyond or before colonization, because even the Christianity becoming a part of the Roman Empire, and then the ways in which there was colonizing forces throughout Europe before the 1500s. We're still dealing with colonization in that time period. We talk about religious freedom. I think this part of religious freedom that's rooted in the Puritans coming over to Turtle Island on the Mayflower, but they weren't just looking for religious freedom. So we do have to understand the full story. Like, they had religious freedom in the Netherlands. They escaped England and had religious freedom. But what they realized is that their children were losing their English language. Their children were losing their culture. And so they came here to Turtle Island to preserve culture and expand in a way that wasn't just about religious freedom, right? It was about religious freedom and the preservation, and then settler mentality.
Susan, I think that we have to deal with colonization. We have to be in that moment around that piece of history because it's extreme and important. But what I guess I want to communicate is, when I remembered that there was whiteness on the other side of colonization, when I remember that there was practices and ritual and beauty past to those folks getting on that boat and stealing my people, it returned some humanity to white people for me that wasn't there before. And if I can get some of the humanity that I've seen disappear or dissipate in colonization return, I wonder what that would do to white people, to have their own sense of connectivity reestablished. Right. To see yourself outside of being a colonizer. And how do you do that authentically, right?
Right.
In anti-racism work for years, people have talked about one of the powers of racism is to strip white people of a connection to our heritage and our roots, because racism wants to make us all into white people who have power. And so we lose that connection. And I think it's important to reclaim that connection, that culture, the beautiful parts of it. I think it's important. But I'm hoping we can bring this back to the work that we're doing right now, because if we're recognizing that Unitarian Universalism and Unitarian Universalist history is that steeped in the settler colonialist project, in the history that gave us white supremacy culture in the United States, then that brings us to how we're going to dismantle that. How we're going to change things to be in a new place. And it brings us specifically in the present to how we're implementing the recommendations of the Commission on Institutional Change, who spent a lot of time on The View as they were doing their work and coming up with their report, but who were asked to look at white supremacy culture and Unitarian Universalism and start us off. They weren't asked to do all the work, but to start us off on the road to dismantling it. And I know that that work is now all of ours to do, but Susan and Carrie, I know that you're hoping to talk some about what UUA headquarters is doing to implement those recommendations?
Absolutely. And just taking a little bit of a move back, what I've been saying to our staff and the board, that as I think about the last 18 months of my time as UUA president, we have three kind of key big areas of focus. And one, which we've touched on a little bit, is just continuing to support our congregations and religious leaders as the pandemic continues. And hopefully the post-pandemic reality. I don't know how much post we'll get for a while, but anyway, number one, these are not necessarily in order. That's one. And the other is really building on the learnings from UU the Vote and the capacity and strength we built through UU the Vote, and helping to deepen that organizing and partnership and expanding our capacity to work for justice across the association. And then the third is really the implementation of the commission's report, which will extend beyond my presidency. So there's some things that we're concretely putting in place, have put in place, that come from the report. And then there's things that we're trying to put the foundation in place because they're long-term work. And we'll get some of it done in the next 18 months and more will have to happen. So just to kind of move back and think that's kind of how we're thinking about the next year and a half. And then, yes, let's dive into some specifics about some of our implementation of the commission's report. Some things we did really early on, and we were in conversation with the commissioners as they were doing their work and doing the report. So some of the things in the report we already were moving on, like new hiring policies, working on processes to help shift the culture of the UUA, the staff culture, to provide not just diverse hiring, but actually supporting a diverse group of staff being successful and thriving in the organization. So those are pieces we have already been putting in and refining and growing, but many other things. And Carrie, I'll turn it over to you to share a few things and we can go back and forth a little bit if we want.
Yeah, that'd be great. So the report, which I hope you all have had a chance to check out if you're reading this, is available totally online. You can read all of it on the UUA website. You can also buy the book. You can get an ebook if that's easier to read. And I also wanted to make sure that folks know we did a first year implementation plan, which you can download at uua.org/COIC/2021 plan. And we're going to be updating this in the years ahead. And we created a whole cross-staff team that both Susan and I were on, with 8 or 9 other folks who are the most involved in the implementation work across a bunch of our staff teams. And we met basically weekly the entire last year to get to this level of clarity about what our implementation work is. And I think that the breadth of the COIC's, the Commission on Institutional Changes, set of report and recommendations is both the power and the challenge. It touches so many parts of our work. And just for the record, it's not just about UUA staff and volunteers, right? This has work and recommendations that apply to our identity and professional groups, that apply to our seminaries, and yes, absolutely apply to our congregations and communities. We have a study action guide that we developed to go alongside the report. So I've heard from so many congregations and congregational leaders who have found all of the kind of comprehensive analysis and understanding of what's going on in our faith community and what's gone on in one place. To have that all in one place is transformative by itself. So there's a lot of work to do. And so I'd love to talk about a couple of the highlights, in addition to the huge amount of investment we've been trying to make in our workplace. A couple of the things I want to mention. One is a conflict engagement team called Hope for Us that we've started. And this is focused on high conflict congregational situations. And we've just been recruiting and are in the process of bringing on some coaches that are not our staff, but are folks engaged at the congregational level. And we're going to be doing some joint training so that those both can be deployed to support our congregations in the depths of some of these really powerful struggles. The thing I really like about Hope for Us is that it gives us an example of something that was, yes, it was a big recommendation in the Commission on Institutional Change report. It's something that has pushed us to grow and leverage our skills as the UUA staff, but it also really points the way forward, not only in what we need to dismantle, but the culture that we want to build, where conflict is understood as an inherent part of community. It's not wrong, but we have to be ready for how we engage our covenant and our commitments. And that takes, skill and energy and effort. And it's really important. You can't make progress on addressing culture-wide deep issues if you don't have those feedback and conflict engagement mechanism. So really excited about their work, the sense of how to engage conflict in faithful ways, radiating out from there and affecting many more people than just the folks who are in direct content, but the resources and trainings and stuff that goes on with that. We've got some more that I want to talk about, but I just wanted to start there.
I could take up another piece, Carrie. Just briefly, a number of recommendations in the report were about increasing resources and scholarship and funding for BIPOC religious professionals, disabled, trans religious professionals. So we're working on that, as well as funds for innovative ministries that are specifically operating out of a lens of equity, diversity, anti-racism, anti-oppression, that are serving communities that have traditionally not been invested in within Unitarian Universalism. So we're looking at how we create those kinds of scholarships and grants support. We're having conversations about decolonizing wealth and philanthropy at the UUA and our movement and our resources and how we fundraise and how we give out money. So what are guideposts and guidelines that need to direct all of our grant making? The UUA, one piece of our work, and it's not siloed, it doesn't just exist in one place, but we do give out sizable amounts of grants every year. And so how are we looking at that work through a lens of anti-racism and equity? So that's another piece. One piece that I'm excited about, not everyone loves bylaws work, but that was another thing that the commission's report talked about. It talked about our governance structure that emphasized checks and balances rather than focus on mission. And so one of the things I think we've done really well in the UUA staff is identify a clear mission. Our mission is to equip our congregations for vital ministry, train and support leaders, both lay and professional, and advance UU values in the world. And having that kind of clarity of mission, as well as our operational vision, the vision we hold at the UUA to be an organization that lives into the liberatory values of Unitarian Universalism and the beloved community where all people of all identities can thrive. That kind of mission and vision work really drives how we collaborate, how we set our priorities, and we lift it up again and again to guide our work. So our governance structure is not like that. It's overly detailed, which restricts our ability to innovate. It creates, as the commission says, a lot of checks and balances rather than focus on mission. So we're really looking at an overhaul of our bylaws that will allow innovation, that will be in plain language so that it's accessible to more people to understand the governance and get involved, and that it really is focused on living into our mission and our vision and accountable to our values. So that's a process that we're working on it right now. If we're lucky, we would bring changes at GA of 2023. It might be 2024. It's moving along in parallel. Let's talk about GA, because some of this bylaw stuff and rule stuff that we're working on directly impacts GA. And one of the things that 2 virtual GAs, the pandemic, has shown us is that we have long in our movement had conversations about ways that GA needs to change. This conversation about every other year GA, whatever side you're on, it's been going on for like 20 years. But that our bylaws are one of the things that prevents us from being innovative, because so much about General Assembly, so much detail is spelled out in the bylaws. So Carrie, why don't you share some of what this really truly multi-platform General Assembly that we are planning for 2022. It'll be both online everywhere and in-person things in Portland, Oregon in June. The goal is to have not identical, but equitable kinds of offerings across platforms. Some things will be totally shared, and there might be some unique but equitable content that's just in one place or the other. Much will be available on both, but we're really trying to hold up this idea of equitable kinds of interactions across the multiple platforms.
Yeah, absolutely. GA 2022 multi-platform GA is going to be groundbreaking and a huge experiment. And we, in trying to figure out what to do on just a logistical level, we had these pre-existing contracts in Portland, but we also knew how powerful virtual General Assembly had been and how much more accessible. I mean, it's just a fraction of the cost of attending in person. We had the highest attendance at our 2 virtual General Assemblies, and they both were like most attended General Assemblies. And so we were really committed to not losing that accessibility, as well as being able to have the meaningful in-person opportunities. And so it's been a real process of discernment. I'm really excited about where things are landing with some of these guiding principles, like what Susan just discussed about making sure there's equitable opportunities regardless of your location to be a part of the GA community. I think in particular, the way that we deal with the business sessions, I'm really excited about. We hope to move some of the things that have always happened kind of in rooms and in hallways to before GA. So there's opportunities to bring things like amendments or actions of immediate witness before GA to give people time to think about them. And that during GA, what we're trying to do is get away from the parliamentary procedure, the raise your vote cards, and snap voting, and that makes it hard to figure out what's going on. So you kind of have to be like a governance geek to even follow what's happening, and instead make it really possible for people to know what they're voting on in advance, to do the voting by online ballot like we do for elections, and give delegates real time to connect with their congregations in advance, who they're supposed to be representing there. So it's going to be a real change in business. I'm super excited about what this will mean for people being able to meaningfully participate in the decisions of our association, regardless of kind of what you're bringing to the table or how much experience you have. And that's just one example of where we're kind of building the path as we go. And the whole conference industry is like wrestling with these challenges. And then you layer on top of that all the unique stuff about General Assembly and the history of General Assembly and the people involved. We're really excited. Registration is already open, so you can already register. The one other thing I want to say is that in part because of the advocating from our youth and young adult communities in particular, we've now made registration for the business session of General Assembly a separate sliding scale. So no one is prevented from being able to participate in the decision-making of the association because of economic hardship. That's not democratic, right? If you want to register for the program of General Assembly, so you get access to worship and the programs, that's a separate piece to it.
Thank you, Carrie. I just want to add a little bit about the business piece, about how one of the things I think became really clear through the virtual General Assembly were the ways in which, like, in real time, changes and amendments make things less accessible to all delegates. It can be really confusing what's happening, where we are in the discussion because of things changing. When we're at GA, there's like furious printing of hundreds or 1,000 of here are your newest amendments. For a lot of people, that's not accessible to actually understanding and being deeply engaged in the conversation. So I just wanted to lift up about how some of the realities of the virtual GA made some of the real problems in our process more obvious, which is good because we can make changes to them. So we even imagine, like, what would it be to kind of have all the business settled in terms of not making amendments at the beginning of GA, and then maybe voting near the end. When you don't have to vote in the room, you can vote online, you can hear debate, we can focus on discussion on the issues at hand, but then folks don't have to vote in that moment either, right? They can talk to their colleagues, friends, think about it, because people do process, learn, and engage material differently. So I'm very excited about that.
It's interesting to make the connection between association life and congregational life, because I think in every congregation there are also things that we learned about accessibility, especially when the pandemic forced us to learn them. Largely, like, disabled communities have been telling us for many years. I just want to honor that we've been told a lot, you can do this, you can do this, you can do this. And when we had to do it, we did it. And now we know that we can do it, and we can't pretend that we can't do it anymore. And it goes for how we make worship accessible in our congregations, how we make governance accessible in our congregations, but also at the association level too. There are many parallels. So we only have a couple minutes left, and Susan, we don't get you here on The View often. So I just want to give you a chance, if there are other things that you want to make sure people hear from you, things that you're really hoping to do in the last 2 years of your presidency that you want us to be aware of and ready to support.
Yeah. One is that I hope you will support bylaw changes. I don't know exactly. This year, we might just like have a business resolution that says, yes, we need to reimagine our bylaws and our structures to unlock our values and our mission. And I would love support around that, because I think this is a time for innovation and creativity and really unlocking our systems and our processes to be more inclusive and effective. So that's like my big thing. I really imagined that when I was running for president, that like these big structural governance things create all kinds of obstacles to inclusion and don't serve our mission. So that's one of my big pieces. To me, the time before New Year's is really one of my favorite seasons. I think it is an invitation to reflect and look back as well as ahead. And I wish for all of you peace, gentleness, fierceness where you need it, and overwhelming, overflowing love. As you all say, love relentlessly, right? Just that spirit embodied. And I'm grateful for you all as at the CLF. I'm grateful for each of you as leaders. I think about my term as coming to an end. It's a part of my space, and just what an incredible honor and how important these last years have been and will continue to be. And what an honor it continues to be UUA president.
You know, this time leading into the holidays is one of our favorite times of year at CLF as well. And so I just want to make sure everyone is invited to connect with the CLF community. We do say that we show up and love relentlessly, and we have a lot of fun with each other. In these weeks leading up to Christmas, some of the pictures in that online video were from some of our fun events. We cook and we bake and we make gingerbread houses, and we write holiday greetings to our now almost 1,500 incarcerated Unitarian Universalist members. We made that video in June and it was over 1,200. We're at like 1,490 as of this week, which is pretty astounding. So we invite you to join CLF Connect community as well this time of year. Carrie, do you have anything that you'd like to say as we close?
So appreciate the opportunity to be with you all and to just go in all sorts of different directions. Just one thing that's really on my heart is parents and caregivers right now. I'm a parent. I've got 2 small kids, and you can't separate the pandemic experience from the being a parent or caregiver in the pandemic. That struggle is real, and I want to honor that. May you have workplaces and colleagues and friends that support you in doing what you need to do to care for your family. May you have a time of rest and joy and renewal for your family. And may we all follow the teachings. I want to channel the teachings of one of our departed beloveds, Alandria Williams, who said it has to start with care. Like the practice of caring for the people right in front of us is the practice of love at the biggest scale. We have to start there and noticing who's around us. And so that is absolutely what family is about. That's how we try to lead and practice our relationships with our staff, with our constituents, with our partners. That's not about always agreeing and always thinking the same thing. On the contrary, it's about loving through that. And so just wanted to offer a special appreciation and wishes towards all of us who are parents and caregivers.
Gracias por joining us. Special thanks to those of you who give generously to this ministry, be it time, talent, or treasure. It is because of you that this ministry is possible. You can click the link in the description to give now, or visit clfuu.org/podcast for more information. If you enjoyed this podcast, please make sure to subscribe, rate, and review so that others can find us. Thanks again for listening.